Alright, guys, I'm mostly reading this article just as almost a chronological opening to the next few videos that I'm going to be making. So, obviously, you remember this article. It's total crap. But I'm just reading it for the historical sake. Anyways, inclusive or hypocritical. Mixed reviews for Trump campaign's LGBT merchandise. This is gross. Obviously. While some have criticized the products, others say it's another sign that Trump, quote, doesn't use the LGBT community as a wedge issue. President Donald Trump's campaign has introduced new LGBTQ pride merchandise through its website, sparking criticism that the offerings appear to be at odds with its administration's policy track record. The merchandise, which was first reported by New Now Next, includes a white t shirt that reads, "Make America Great Again" in rainbow letters. The product description reads, quote, "Show your support for the LGBT community and the 45th president with this exclusive Make America Great Again t shirt," end quote. The site is also selling a rainbow Make America Great Again hat, which is currently sold out. Quote, Trump selling pride t-shirts when his very administration attacks LGBTQ people on a daily, one person tweeted. Continues, "It's like we are all in a damn twilight zone." Uh, Trump selling pride shirts when his very administration attacks LGBTQ people on a daily, and Zimmerman countersuing the family that he destroyed by gun violence. I don't know why it cuts out like that. Anyways, several policy measures criticized as anti-LGBTQ have either been proposed or enacted under the Trump administration, including the president's contentious transgender military policy, which bars transgender personnel from serving openly and denies them access to gender affirming medical care, and the administration's proposed rule to ban the exemption that allows religiously affiliated businesses to ignore anti discrimination laws. Many of the Trump advisors and appointees have been criticized for their actions and statements against LGBTQ people. Just last month, NBC News reported that Clarence Mason Weaver, a right wing pundit who called being gay, quote, an abomination, was appointed as an advisor board to the, quote, Black Voices for Trump campaign coalition. This is not the first time the Trump campaign, which did not respond to NBC News request for comment, has been criticized as hypocritical for selling LGBTQ merchandise. Earlier this year, during LGBTQ Pride Month, the campaign unveiled another white T-shirt with a rainbow flag that read "LGBTQ for Trump." Quote, "Trump who blames." Oh, I think I read this already back there. Um, oh, okay, it was there. Anyways, quote, "Trump who banned troops is against LGBTQ employment protections, wants people to be able to turn away LGBT customers, and is denying citizenship to kids of U.S. gay couples born out of wedlock, is selling a LGBTQ for Trump shirts for Pride." BuzzFeed journalist David Mack wrote on Twitter at the time. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer voters have been a reliable part of the Democratic voting base. In 2016, 78% of the LGBTQ voters reported voting for Hillary Clinton, and in 2018, 82% of the LGBT voters reported backing a Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, according to exit polls. Some LGBTQ voters do identify as part of Trump's base, including some members of the Log Cabin Republicans, a gay conservative group that faced internal turmoil earlier this year after some of its leadership endorsed Trump's. Ooh, wow, endorsing the re-election. Charles Morin, The national spokesperson for the log cabin Republicans said that LGBTQ merchandise in Trump's campaign store is nothing new and that he's had some form of it since Trump started running. But he says the fact that the quote, Make America Great Again pride hat in the store is currently sold out is what's selling. Quote, we're seeing at the log cabin Republicans that it's not just your traditional Republicans who are gravitating towards Trump, but disaffected Democrats and independents who are heartened by the president's approach. Moron told NBC News, quote, gays are not necessarily voting in a bloc like they have in the past. Moran added that the president has a track record of advocating for the LGBT community through his words and policy, citing the administration's February announcement of a campaign to decriminalize homosexuality globally, and last week's announcement that the U.S. government will start a national HIV prevention program and will distribute free HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis medication as examples of such advocacy. Quote, Trump has thrown out the old playbook and, unlike previous Republican administrations, doesn't use the LGBT community as a wedge issue, Moran said. But, of course, the track record of his policies we will see in this next article. Alright. The Discrimination Administration. Oh, wow, that rhymes. Alright. Since the day President Trump took office, his administration has waged a nonstop onslaught against the rights of LGBTQ people. In order to keep the administration accountable for its policies and help transgender people keep track of actions taken against us, here are the major changes implemented or attempted by the Trump administration. I kind of want to go backwards, actually, since I feel like it makes sense that way. So this isn't all about LGBTQ, but this is just in general attitude of what he's done. Alright. Banning Muslims and refugees. On January 27th, 2017, and again on March 6th, President Trump signed executive orders seeking to ban entry by refugees and travelers from certain Muslim majority countries and drastically reduce the numbers of refugees allowing to seek safety in the United States. We cannot stand for a world where people in danger are denied entry because of who they are, including where they come from or whether they are a Muslim or any other religion. LGBT refugees are among the many who are fleeing life-threatening persecution because of who they are or what they believe. While the bans were allowed to take effect by the Supreme Court, court cases challenging them continue. Expanding immigration detention. Alright. The Department of Homeland Security is vastly expanding the number of immigrants held in immigration detention centers nationwide, while also eliminating protections for health and safety in detention centers. Reducing these protections for immigrants who are being detained is wrong, and it's especially dangerous for vulnerable transgender immigrants, many of whom are asylum seekers who risk extreme abuse. Putting healthcare out of reach. On April 13th, 2017, the Department of Health and Human Services rolled back numerous Affordable Health Care Act rules to reduce protections for people seeking and using health insurance. These actions make it harder to enroll in healthcare plans, allow plans to sharply rise deductibles, and weaken requirements for insurance plans to have in-network providers that serve low-income communities. These changes disproportionately affect people of color and any other lower incomes, including transgender people. I don't remember if that study I read had anything to do with the finances, but it could have. I don't remember. Alright, these changes make getting healthcare coverage harder for people who lose coverage on who depend on community clinics. cruel and relentless attacks on immigrant communities. On September 5th, 2017, President Trump acted to strip hundreds of thousands of Americans and their families of security, stability, and safety by ending the deferred action for childhood arrivals. On April 6, 2018, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a zero tolerance policy that separated hundreds of immigrant children from their families. On April 10th, a federal official announced that the Department of Justice was halting the legal orientation program, which offers legal assistance to immigrants. On June 11th, Attorney General Sessions ruled that domestic or gang violence are not grounds for asylum in the United States. Though these are just a few of many anti-immigration actions that are especially dangerous for many LGBTQ people who could face life-threatening violence if deported. I imagine it's a double-edged sword for immigrants who they have to be deported back with or something. I don't know. They're going back to maybe they feel America is more like tolerant, or so they think, but then they get deported back to where it most likely isn't as tolerant. I don't know. Anyways, harming sexual assault survivors. On September 7th, 2017, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announced she would withdraw historic guidance on schools and universities' responsibilities to address sexual assault and sexual harassment. On September 27, 2017, the department replaced this guidance with flawed and dangerous interim guidance, tipping the scales against student survivors seeking protection on campus. This is especially dangerous for transgender students because 47% of transgender adults in the U.S. Transgender Survey were sexual assault survivors. Targeting reproductive rights. On October 6, 2017, the Department of Health and Human Services issued a regulation allowing employment and insurers to deny coverage for birth control as long as they can cite religious reasons for doing so. In April, President Trump and Congress overturned a regulation that protected Planned Parenthood, one of the nation's largest providers of care for transgender people and other family planning clinics, from funding discrimination by states. Kicking Americans off Medicaid and food stamps. The Trump administration has taken numerous actions to kick Americans in need off of Medicaid and SNAP coverage. On April 10th, Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies to push for work requirements for low-income people in America who receive federal assistance, including Medicaid and SNAP. Other harmful Trump administration actions. The Trump administration has taken many other actions to roll back civil rights and health care protections and target vulnerable communities, while not specifically directed at trans people or gender identity protections. We list them here because it is crucially important that we view our quest for transgender equality as intertwined with other social justice movements. These include attacks on reproductive rights, the Affordable Care Act, refugees and other immigrants, and the enforcement of civil rights laws. Many of these actions will also disproportionately harm transgender people. These are just a few examples. Alright, on January 20th, 2017, on President Trump's inauguration day, the administration scrubbed all mentions of LGBTQ people from the websites of the White House, Department of State, and Department of Labor. January 31st, 2017, President Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch has a history of anti-transgender rulings. Now, if anyone thinks this is too vague, and if you think I need to do some research on any of these actors that I'm talking about, feel free to comment or something. Like and subscribe if you're still following, I guess. Anyways, February 22nd, 2017, the Department of Justice and Education withdraw landmark 2016 guidance explaining how schools must protect transgender students under the federal title 9 law. March 1st, 2017, the Department of Justice took the highly unusual step of declining to appeal a nationwide preliminary court order temporarily halting enforcement of the Affordable Care Act's non discrimination protections for transgender people. The injunction prevents HHS from taking any action to enforce transgender people's rights from healthcare discrimination. Damn. March 2nd, 2017. The Department of Justice abandoned its request for a preliminary injunction against North Carolina's anti-transgender House Bill 2, which prevented North Carolina from enforcing HB 2. This was an early sign that the administration was giving up defending trans people. Later, on April 14th, it withdrew the lawsuit completely. March 8th, 2017. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, removed demographic questions about LGBTQ people that Centers for Independent Living must fill out each year in their annual program performance report. This report helps HHS evaluate problems that serve people with disabilities. March 10th, 2017, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced it would withdraw two important agency proposed policies designed to protect LGBT people experiencing homelessness. One proposed policy would have required Homeland Urban Development funding urgency shelters to put up a poster or notice to residents of their rights to be free from anti-LGBTQ discrimination under HUD regulations. March 13th, 2017, the State Department announced the official U.S. delegation to the UN's 61st Annual Commission on the States of Women Conference would include two outspoken anti-LGBT organizations, including a representative of the Center for Family and Human Rights, an organization designated as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'll have to look that up, actually. Remind me in a comment somewhere to do that. Alright. March 13th, 2017, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that its National Service of Older Adults and the services they need would no longer collect information on LGBT practices. His HHS initially falsely claimed in its Federal Register announcement that it was taking no chances to the survey. March 24th, 2017, the Justice Department canceled the long-planning National Institute of Corrections broadcast on transgender persons in custody, the legal landscape. All right. March 28th, 2017, the Census Bureau retracted a proposal to collect demographic information on LGBT people in the 2020 census. I'm usually kind of sketched out by the census and demographic monitoring, but it seems kind of rude since this is against their consent to... Oh, this is just so they can dead name, basically. Anyways, March 2017, the Department of Housing and Urban Development removed links to 4 key resource documents from its website, which informed emergency shelters on best practices for serving transgender people facing homelessness and complying with HUD regulations. March 31st, 2017, the the Justice Department announced it would review and likely seek to scale back numerous civil rights settlements agreements with policy departments. These settlements were put in place where police departments were determined to be engaging in discriminatory and abusive policy and policing, including racial and other profiling. Many of these agreements including critical protections for LGBT people. April 4th, 2017, the Department of Justice and Labor canceled quarterly conference calls with LGBT organizations. On these calls, which had happened for years, government attorneys shared information on the employment laws and cases. Uh, April 14th, 2017, the Department of Justice abandoned its historic lawsuit challenging North Carolina's anti-transgender law. It did so after North Carolina replaced HB 2 with a different anti-transgender law known as HB 2.0. Wow, smartass. Um, on May 2nd, 2017, the Department of Health and Human Services announced a plan to roll back regulations interpreting the Affordable Care Act's non discrimination provisions to protect transgender people. June 14th, 2017, the Department of Education withdrew its funding that an Ohio school district discrimination against a transgender girl. Withdrew its finding. Oh, the department gave no explanation for withdrawing the finding, which a federal judge upheld. Alright, gonna scan through these a little bit. No. July 13th, 2017, President Trump nominated Mark Norris to the United States District Court for the Western District of Tennessee. Norris has worked to make it easier to discriminate against LGBTQ people and even worked to discriminate specifically against transgender kids. July 26, 2017, the Justice Department filed a legal brief on behalf of the United States in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, arguing that the 1964 Civil Rights Act does not prohibit discrimination against on sexual orientation or implicit gender identity. Implicitly gender identity. July 26, 2017, President Trump announced on Twitter that, quote, the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the United States military. Going up a little bit. August 25th, 2017, President Trump released a memo directing Defense Department to move forward with developing a plan to discharge transgender military service members and to maintain a ban on recruitment. September 7th, 2017, President Trump nominated Jeff Mateer to become a United States District Judge of the United States District Court for the East District of Texas. Mateer called transgender children part of, quote, Satan's plan. Oh, jeez. And openly supported, debunked, and dangerous conversion therapy. Mateer's nomination was eventually withdrawn. Alright. So you get the gist. I am gonna go to 2019. Alright. So, I don't know, 2019 is pretty nostalgic because that was before COVID. And for me, that, I don't know. You know how it is. COVID pretty much changed everyone's life. If anyone wants me to read the rest of that, I won't mind, but I feel like most of you got the gist of that. But anyways, January 23rd, 2019, the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights granted an exemption to adoption and foster care agencies in South Carolina, allowing religiously affiliated services to discriminate against current and aspiring LGBTQ caregivers. March 13th, 2019, the Department of Defense laid out its plans for implementing its ban on transgender troops, giving an official implementation date of April 12th. April 12th, 2019, the Department of Defense put President Trump's ban on transgender service members into effect, putting service members at risk of discharge if they come out or are found out to be transgender. April 2019. Sorry. I spaced out for a second. April 2019. April 19th. 19. Okay, that's why that was confusing me. The Department of Health and Human Services announced a proposed rule to abandon data collection on sexual orientation of foster and adopted parents and guardians. May 2nd, 2019. The Department of Health and Human Services published a final rule encouraging hospital officials, staff, and insurance companies to deny care to patients, including transgender patients, based on religious or moral beliefs. Okay, a moral belief is just, that's new to me, honestly. Anyways, this vague and broad rule was immediately challenged in court. Yeah, thank you, broad. Anyways, May 14th, 2019, President Trump announced his opposition to the Equality Act, H.R. 5, the federal legislation that would confirm and strengthen civil rights protections for LGBTQ Americans and others. May 22nd, 2019, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced a plan to gut regulations prohibiting discrimination against transgender people in HUD funded homeless shelters. May 24th, 2019, the Department of Health and Human Services published a proposed rule that will remove all recognition that federal law prohibits transgender patients from discrimination in healthcare. Courts across the nation have ruled otherwise. July 3rd, 2019, the Department of Housing and Urban Development removed requirements that applicants for homelessness funding maintain anti-discrimination policies and demonstrate efforts to serve LGBT people and their families who are more likely to be homeless. July 8th, 2019, the Department of State established a, quote, Commission on Unalienable Rights aimed at narrowing our country's human rights advocacy to fit with the natural law and natural rights view of social conservatives, stating it would seek to, quote, be vigilant that human rights discourse not be corrupted or hijacked or used for dubious or malignant purposes. Shortly thereafter, the State Department official tasked with coordinating the new commission was fired for abusive management, including homophobic remarks. Okay. July 15th, 2019, the Department of Justice and Homeland Security announced an interim final rule that would block the vast majority of asylum seekers from entering the United States, with deadly consequences, and those fleeing anti-LGBTQ violence. August 14th, 2019, the Department of Labor announced a proposed rule that would radically expand the ability of federal contractors to exempt themselves from equal employment opportunities requirements, allowing for-profit and non-profit employees to impose religious criteria on the employees that couldn't include barring LGBTQ employees. Okay. August 16th, 2019, the Department of Justice filed a brief in the U.S. Supreme Court arguing that federal law, quote, does not prohibit discrimination against transgender persons based on their transgender status. September 19th, 2019, the Department of Health and Human Services canceled a plan to explicitly prohibit hospitals from discrimination against LGBTQ patients as a requirement of Medicare and Medicaid funds. November 1st, 2019, the Department of Education published final regulations permitting religious schools to ignore non-discrimination standards set by accredited agencies. November 1st, 2019, the Department of Health and Human Services announced it would not enforce and plan to repeal regulations prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity, sexual orientation, and religion in all HHS grant programs. These include programs to address HIV, opioid, and youth homelessness epidemics, as well as hundreds of billions of dollars in other health and human service programs. November 5th, 2019, the Department of Labor proposed to exempt the TRICARE healthcare program for military dependents and retirees from requirements not to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. It is not immediately apparent whether TRICARE intends to make any changes in its benefit policies. Currently, TRICARE covers hormone therapy and counseling for transgender retirees and dependents, but DoD interprets the TRICARE statute to include transition-related surgery, regardless of medical necessity. Hmm. January 16th, 2020. 9 federal agencies: Department of Agriculture, Education, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Justice, Labor, Veterans Affairs, and the U.S. Agency on International Development all proposed rule changes that would eliminate the rights of people receiving people from federal programs to uh, request a referral if they have a concern or problem with the faith-based provider, and to receive written notice of their rights, and that would encourage agencies to claim religious exemptions to deny help to certain people while receiving federal funds. Uh, right. February 27th, 2020, the Department of Justice filed another court brief, this time in Western District of Kentucky, expressing the view of the United States that anti-LGBTQ discrimination is not, quote, a sufficient government interest to overcome the objections of private business who want to deny expressive services such as photography services to LGBTQ people, and that these businesses must be permitted to opt out of complying with local non-discrimination laws. March 26, 2020. The Department of Justice filed a court brief in the District of Connecticut in opposition to a Connecticut interscholastic athletic conference policy that allows transgender athletes to play sports with their peers. May 6, 2020, the Department of Education published a final rule encouraging schools to dramatically weaken protections for student survivors of sexual violence and harassment, and eliminating a provision that encouraged religiously affiliated schools to notify the department and public of their intent to discriminate on the basis of sex under Title IX waiver. May 8th, 2020, the Department of Health and Human Services published a final rule eliminating collection of sexual orientation data on foster youth and foster and adoptive care and guardians, and rejected proposals to collect gender identity data. May 15th, 2020, the Department of Education issued a letter declaring that the federal Title IX rule requires schools to ban transgender students from participating in school sports, and threatened to withdraw funding from Connecticut schools if they do not comply. June 19th, 2020, the Department of Healthcare and Human Services announced that it finalized the extensive rollback of healthcare discrimination rules to eliminate the protections for transgender people experiencing discrimination in healthcare settings and or insurance companies denying transition-related care, as well as to weaken non-discriminatory access to healthcare for those with limited English proficiency. July 23rd, 2020. The Department of Housing and Urban Development formally announced the rollback of a previous rule that protected transgender people from discrimination by homeless shelters and other housing services receiving federal funds. All right. And now recently we have this, which, I mean, it's no surprise.
Left-wing gender insanity being pushed on our children is an act of child abuse. Very simple. Here's my plan to stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids
Yeah, Joe Biden isn't rolling this back, but like he's no better with like Title 42 or anything. Um, but this is not about that. Obviously, supporting Biden, supporting LGBTQ rights is, you know, we support him while he supports Title 42, which, you know, it sucks that he can't just take away Title 42 while supporting trans and LGBTQ people. But that seems off topic, and that's a ramble for now, whatever.
Puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. Can you believe this? I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to...
If you had paid attention, not talking to Trump, I'm talking to anyone who's watching this video, that Swedish study and other studies most likely say that transitioning starts in your teens, not young children. Like, I don't know what he has in his mind when he thinks young children. Like, I mean, people are still called babies when they're adults sometimes, so who knows?
cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. I will then ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly. I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that
You know, you could just say any surgery is probably mutilation. This is obviously nonsense.
participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety
Man, he loves the word mutilation.
standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. Furthermore, I will support the creation of a private right of action for victims to sue doctors who have unforgivably performed these procedures on minor children. The Department of Justice will investigate Big Pharma and the big...
So, Trump is being dishonest, and we know it. But, this is him actively declaring medical apartheid, if you haven't realized.
hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transitions in order to get rich at the expense of vulnerable patients, in this case, very vulnerable. We will also investigate whether Big Pharma or others have illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers which are in no way licensed or approved for this use. My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential...
So this symbolic way of thinking about things is now police. Okay. Thanks, dude.
civil rights violations for sex discrimination and the elimination of federal funding. As part of our new credentialing body for teachers, we will promote positive education about the nuclear family, the roles of mothers and fathers, and celebrating rather than erasing the things that make...
Oh, he's also talking about like family planning, social engineering. This is actually kind of what I wanted to talk about in a script that I had typed out, but I'm not getting to it yet. Whatever. It's kind of weird that he said all that.
men and women different and unique. I will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth. The bill will also make clear that Title IX prohibits men from participating in women's sports, and we will protect the rights of parents from being forced to allow their minor child to assume a gender which is new and an identity without the parents' consent.
So when the kids decide to do this without their parents' consent and get like back alley trans surgery, sort of like back alley abortions like women had to do, is this like the equivalent we're heading towards now? Like, come on.
The identity will not be new, and it will not be without parental consent. No serious country should be telling its children that they were born with the wrong gender.
Okay, he's not really talking about consent at all, but whatever. Um, he's just talking about, you know, just general cracking down on the populace, you know. Consent should be with the parents and the child, obviously, but nobody says consent of the government. Like, he's not gonna say that. Nobody says that, okay? Like, oh my god. Like, in a way, like, consent is a luxury in our little worlds that we're allowed to have, you know, while the government isn't immediately killing us. I don't know. Maybe that's talking out my ass.
A concept that was never heard of in all of human history. Nobody's ever heard of this, what's happening today. It was all when the radical left invented it just a few years ago. Under my leadership, this madness will end. Thank you very much.
Well, that's terrifying. I'm sorry, guys. Alright. This next video is an admission that this is actually a genocide from Planned Parenthood. Alright. New York City advocates...
As a full-time roller skater, I would get tax paperwork, the I-9s, the invoices, 1099.
Sorry about that. Alright. New York City advocates slam Trump's push for transgender genocide. A Trump administration proposal to strictly define sex is a dangerous attack on transgender people, advocates said. Alright. New York City Hall. A Trump administration proposal that would essentially end federal recognition of transgender people drew fire Wednesday from New York City advocates and elected officials, some of whom compared it to genocide. Quote, "It's inhumane, it is cruel, it is discriminatory, and is shockingly dangerous. It will lead to genocide," Laura McQuaid, the president of CEO of Planned Parenthood of New York City, told a crowd of more than 200 at a rally outside City Hall. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has proposed defining sex as an unchangeable biological characteristic. Under the federal civil rights law, the New York Times reported Sunday, citing a memo that was drafted last spring. Under the proposal, one sex, male or female, would be determined by one's genitals at birth and could be only disputed with reliable genetic evidence, according to the Times. The policy change would reportedly erase transgender people from federal law and continue the Trump administration's effort to roll back protections established under former President Barack Obama. The proposal has created confusion and concern in an already difficult climate for transgender and non-binary people, said Sasha Alexander, the director of membership for Sylvia Rivera Law Project. Quote, "Now people are wondering, are they going to be able to change their birth certificate, or are they going to be able to access surgery? Are they going to be able to get married? Are they going to still experience the pervasive discrimination and harassment they experience every day and even before this happened?" Alexander said. While the proposal's exact impact is still uncertain, Alexander said, all current protections for transgender people remain intact as it is not yet enshrined in the law. But transgender advocates worry it could affect their ability to access health care, housing, other basic rights. The proposal should also warn women's rights groups, advocates said, especially given the fact that it would impact Title IX, the civil rights law, government educational institution that get federal funding. Oh, by the way, this article is older than the discrimination administration article I just read, but I'm mostly reading this article to get to the point of the rhetoric and the language of genocide, not just being a online YouTuber language, but this is language being used in the world by official people. All right. The statute is a, quote, serious civil rights point where they're attacking us, said Tanya Walker, a co founder of the New York Transgender Advocacy Group. Quote, stop acting like our issues do not intersect. Our issues intersect, Walker said, and goes on to say they want to control our bodies, our minds, and our gender identities. The memo argues for a biological definition of sex that is, quote, grounded in science, according to Times. But Assemblyman Richard Gottfried, Manhattan, dismissed the policy purported scientific basis as hogwash. Quote, that's at best junk science, said Gottfried, who chairs the Assembly's Health Committee. What it really is bigotry, and we're going to defeat it. The American Psychological Association also blasted the proposal Wednesday, saying, quote, it fails to recognize decades of scientific research into psychology, genetics, and physiology. New York City officials touted the local protections against discrimination based on gender identity. Mayor Bill de Blasio recently signed a law creating a third gender option for birth certificates and making it easier for transgender and non-binary people to change their gender markers. But politicians and advocates said there's more work to do in the state legislature, where a proposal to explicitly prohibit transgender identity discrimination has gotten stalled in the Republican-controlled state Senate. Some argued concern New Yorkers to get out and vote in the now November midterm elections. Quote, the only thing standing between Donald Trump and the transgender community now is New York State, said Senator Brad Hoylman. Yep. Alright. So that's really sad. Alright, I'll be back, guys.